At 68 years old, I never imagined my own daughter would throw me out of the house. After living together for over 10 years, she looked me in the eyes and told me I had to leave. The reason left me speechless. To please her mother-in-law, who had arrived a few months earlier for a temporary visit. I never thought I'd be packing my life into boxes at 68, but here I am, my hands shaking as I fold the same sweater my daughter bought me last Christmas. The one she said brought out my eyes. The same eyes she couldn't look into 3 hours ago when she told me I had to leave. You want to know how a mother becomes a stranger in her own home? How 30 years of sacrifice can be erased by 8 months of poison dripped into willing? Ears? I'll tell you, because someone needs to hear this story, and God knows my own flesh and blood won't listen anymore. It started with coffee. Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But I swear to you, the morning Dorothy walked through our front door with her 2 oversized suitcases and that practiced smile, even the coffee tasted different, bitter, like it knew what was coming before I did. Sarah, my daughter, was practically glowing when she announced her mother-in-law would be staying with us for a while. Just temporarily, Mom. She's having some work done on her house, and you know how much Tommy wants his mother close by. Tommy, my son-in-law of 15 years, who still couldn't look me in the eye during conversations, but somehow found his voice when it came to his mother's needs. I should have trusted my gut right then. Should have paid attention to how Dorothy's eyes swept over my kitchen like she was taking inventory. How she commented on everything from the placement of my coffee mugs to the way I'd arranged the morning newspaper. "Oh, Susan, you still read the physical paper? How quaint. I get all my news online now. Much more efficient." Efficient. That word should have been my first warning. Dorothy was 63, 5 years younger than me, but she carried herself like she'd figured out life in a way the rest of us were too simple to understand. Perfectly styled silver hair that never seemed to move, clothes that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check, and this way of speaking that made everything sound like a gentle correction, even when she was asking for directions to the bathroom. "This is such a lovely home," she said that first evening, her manicured fingers trailing along my grandmother's china cabinet. "Sarah's done such wonderful work maintaining it, though I imagine it must be quite a burden, keeping up with all this space." Sarah beamed, actually beamed, like her mother-in-law had just handed her a trophy instead of an insult wrapped in silk. I bit my tongue, literally bit it until I tasted copper, because I knew that cabinet, knew every chip and scratch on those dishes because I'd been the one polishing them for 43 years. Sarah had never so much as dusted that cabinet, but suddenly she was the one maintaining our home. Our home. The house I'd helped buy with the insurance money from my late husband's policy. The house where I'd rocked Sarah through countless midnight fevers, where I'd helped her study for every exam, where I'd held her when her heart broke over boys who didn't deserve her tears. But Dorothy didn't know any of that history. Or maybe she did, and just didn't care. The first week felt like walking on eggshells that were already cracked. Dorothy had this way of inserting herself into every conversation, every routine, every small moment that had previously belonged to just Sarah and me. Our morning coffee talks became 3-way discussions, where Dorothy somehow always managed to steer the topic towards Sarah's responsibilities, Tommy's needs, or little Emma's education. Emma, my granddaughter, 7 years old with my late husband's stubborn chin and Sarah's wild curls. She'd always run straight to me when she got home from school, chattering about her day while I made her an after-school snack. But with Dorothy there, suddenly Emma was learning about proper nutrition and structured snack times. My homemade cookies were replaced with organic fruit bars that tasted like cardboard and good intentions. "Children need consistency, Susan," Dorothy explained one afternoon while Emma sat at the kitchen table, staring longingly at the cookie jar I was no longer allowed to open freely in my own home. "Too much sugar disrupts their concentration. I've been reading the most fascinating studies about childhood nutrition. Studies. Dorothy always had studies. Studies about parenting, studies about household management, studies about financial planning for seniors. She dropped these references like little bombs designed to make the rest of us feel inadequate, uninformed, behind the times. I started noticing how Dorothy's presence changed the very air in our house. Conversations became careful. Laughter felt forced. Even the way Sarah moved seemed different, more deliberate, like she was being watched and judged with every step. And maybe she was. I'd catch Dorothy observing us sometimes, her pale blue eyes tracking every interaction with the precision of a scientist studying lab rats. She'd nod approvingly when Sarah corrected Emma's posture at dinner, or smile that practice smile when Sarah chose Dorothy's preferred brand of laundry detergent over the one I'd been using for decades. Sarah's always been so receptive to guidance, Dorothy mentioned one evening while we cleaned up after dinner. Sarah had gone upstairs to help Emma with homework, and for the first time all week, it was just Dorothy and me in the kitchen. Some people resist change, you know. They get stuck in their ways and can't see when there might be better approaches. She was loading the dishwasher as she spoke, rearranging the way I'd place the dishes with efficient, silent corrections. Moving my coffee mug from the top rack to the bottom, adjusting the angle of the dinner plates, repositioning the silverware like she was solving a puzzle I'd been too stupid to figure out. "I've always done the dishes this way," I said quietly, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. "Oh, I'm sure you have, dear, and I'm sure it's worked fine for you. I just find that optimizing the space leads to better cleaning results. The manufacturer recommendations are quite specific about placement, you know." Manufacturer recommendations for loading a dishwasher in the house I'd been keeping for over 2 decades. That night, lying in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't just the dishes. It wasn't just the cookies or the coffee or the way Dorothy had started sorting through our mail in the mornings, making helpful observations about our subscriptions and bills. It was the way Sarah looked at me now, like she was seeing me through Dorothy's eyes instead of her own. The second week brought new challenges. Dorothy, having apparently completed her assessment of our domestic capabilities, began offering suggestions for improvement. Our grocery shopping routine needed updating. Our television viewing habits were too passive. Our meal planning lacked nutritional balance and cost efficiency. "I hope you don't mind," Dorothy said one morning, standing in my kitchen wearing my apron. When had she started doing that? But I took the liberty of researching some senior-friendly meal options. At our age, Susan, we really need to be more conscious of sodium intake and processed foods. Our age, like we were peers, instead of a woman talking down to another woman in her own home. She'd printed out articles, stacks of them, studies about senior nutrition, financial planning for elderly dependents, the importance of family cohesion in multi-generational households. She left them on my bedstand like homework assignments, with key passages highlighted in yellow. I read every word, trying to understand what message she was sending. The articles weren't random. They painted a very specific picture of aging, parents who became burdens on their adult children, of elderly family members who needed guidance, structure, limitations, of families who thrived when proper boundaries were established and maintained by the younger generation. "Dorothy's been so helpful with research," Sarah mentioned at dinner one evening. "Did you know that financial stress is one of the leading causes of family discord?" She found some really interesting statistics about multi-generational households and economic planning. Emma was picking at her optimally nutritious dinner, while Tommy nodded along, his agreement automatic and unquestioning. This was his mother, after all. His mother who'd driven 12 hours to help his family get their lives organized. His mother, who only wanted what was best for everyone. "I've been thinking," Sarah continued, glancing at Dorothy for what looked like approval. Maybe we should sit down and talk about household expenses. You know, just to make sure everyone's contributing fairly and we're all on the same page about financial responsibilities. Financial responsibilities in the house I'd helped buy, with the woman I'd raised from birth. Of course, sweetheart, I said, the words scraping against my throat like sandpaper. Whatever you think is best. Dorothy's smile never wavered, but I caught something in her eyes that made my stomach clench. Satisfaction. Like a chess player who just moved her queen into position and was already planning her next 3 moves. That night, I stood in my bathroom brushing my teeth with hands that trembled just slightly, and I realized I was afraid. Actually afraid. In my own home, surrounded by my own family, I was becoming afraid to speak, afraid to disagree, afraid to take up space that apparently belonged to someone else now. But fear, I've learned, can be a useful teacher. It was teaching me to pay attention in ways I hadn't before, to notice things I'd been too trusting, too comfortable, too naive to see. The way Dorothy's clothes had gradually migrated from the guest room into other parts of the house. How her toiletries had appeared in the main bathroom. How her preferences for everything from breakfast cereals to television channels had somehow become household defaults. She was moving in, not temporarily, not until her house repairs were finished. She was claiming territory with the methodical patience of someone who'd done this before. And Sarah, my beautiful, intelligent daughter, who'd always been so independent, so strong-willed, was helping her do it. The 3rd week is when I started keeping a journal. Not because I'm sentimental, but because I was beginning to doubt my own memory. When you live with someone who can rewrite reality with the confidence of a news anchor, you start questioning what actually happened versus what you think happened. Dorothy had a gift for that, for making you feel like you'd misunderstood something that had been perfectly clear just moments before. I never said you couldn't use the good china, Susan. I simply suggested that for everyday meals, the regular dishes might be more practical. You must have misheard me. But I knew what I'd heard. I knew the tone. I knew the implication that my grandmother's china was somehow too precious for me to use in my own home. Still, I found myself second-guessing, replaying conversations in my head until they became fuzzy around the edges. So I started writing things down, dates, times, exact words when I could remember them. It felt paranoid at first, like I was documenting evidence for a crime that hadn't been committed yet. Turns out I was. The morning I found Dorothy going through my mail, I almost convinced myself it was innocent. She was standing at the kitchen counter when I came downstairs, my bank statements and utility bills spread out in front of her like she was solving a puzzle. "Oh, good, you're up," she said without looking at me. "I was just organizing these for you. Some of these bills are quite concerning, Susan. Have you looked at your credit card balance lately?" My credit card. The one I'd been paying off for 3 years after helping Sarah through a rough patch when Tommy was between jobs. The balance. I'd been steadily reducing every month with careful budgeting and the occasional sacrifice. "That's private, Dorothy." "Of course it is, dear. I'm not prying." Sarah asked me to help organize the household finances, and I couldn't help but notice some patterns that might be cause for concern. Sarah asked her. My daughter had asked this woman to go through my personal financial information. When did Sarah ask you to do that? Dorothy's hands never stopped moving, sorting papers into neat piles with the efficiency of someone who'd clearly done this before. "Yesterday evening, while you were in the garden. She's worried about the family's financial stability. And honestly, Susan, after seeing these numbers, I can understand why." The garden. I'd been outside for maybe 20 minutes, deadheading the roses and trying to clear my head. 20 minutes? And apparently, that was enough time for my daughter to hand over my financial privacy to a woman who'd been living with us for less than a month. These subscription services alone are costing you nearly $200 a month, Dorothy continued, holding up statements I couldn't quite see from where I stood. And this credit card interest rate is absolutely predatory. At your age, carrying this kind of debt is really quite dangerous. At your age, there it was, again, the gentle reminder that I was too old, too irresponsible, too set in my ways to manage my own affairs. I've been handling my finances just fine for 40 years, Dorothy. I'm sure you have been, dear. But times change. Financial products become more complex. Sarah's just concerned that you might be getting overwhelmed by all the details. Overwhelmed, like I was some addled old woman who couldn't balance a checkbook. That afternoon, Sarah cornered me in the laundry room with a folder full of those highlighted articles Dorothy had been collecting. Articles about elder financial abuse, ironically. Enough, and the warning signs that adult children should watch for when their parents started making questionable financial decisions. Mom, we need to talk about some things Dorothy found in your paperwork. Dorothy found. Not Sarah looked at, not Sarah was concerned about. Dorothy found, like she was some kind of financial detective I'd hired to audit my life. She showed you my bank statements? She was trying to help organize our household budget, and she couldn't help but notice some patterns that are really concerning. Patterns. That word was becoming Dorothy's signature move. Make everything sound like data, like objective analysis, like concern rooted in facts, rather than judgment wrapped in condescension. What patterns? Sarah opened the folder, and I saw my life spread out in neat columns and highlighted sections. My mortgage payment, the mortgage on the house I'd been contributing to for over a decade. My car insurance, my health insurance, my prescription costs, my grocery expenses. Mom, you're spending almost your entire Social Security check every month. Dorothy ran the numbers, and there's barely any buffer for emergencies or unexpected expenses. Dorothy ran the numbers on my income, my expenses, my life. Sarah, I've been managing my money since before you were born. But that's just it. Mom, you're not really managing it anymore. You're just spending it as it comes in, without any real planning or structure. Structure, another one of Dorothy's favorite words. And Dorothy thinks that's a problem? Sarah's face changed slightly, like she was trying to find the right way to phrase something delicate. Dorothy thinks that at your age, you should be focusing on preserving what you have instead of maintaining the same spending patterns you had when Dad was alive. When Dad was alive. When I had his income supplementing mine. When I wasn't a widow trying to stretch a fixed income across the same expenses I'd always had. What exactly are you suggesting? Maybe it's time to think about downsizing some of your expenses. The cable package, some of these subscriptions, maybe even the car if public transportation could work for your needs. My car. The 12-year-old Honda that I'd bought, used and maintained carefully because it represented independence. Because it meant I could drive to my book club and my doctor's appointments and the grocery store without having to ask anyone for rides, like some kind of invalid. Dorothy suggested all this? Dorothy's just trying to help us think practically about the family's long-term financial health. She has experience with this kind of planning. Experience. Of course she did. That evening, I sat in my room with my journal and tried to piece together what was really happening. Dorothy had been in my house for 3 weeks, and somehow she now had access to my personal financial information, input into my spending decisions, and my daughter's ear for every concern she wanted to raise about my capabilities. But it was more than that. It was the way Sarah's vocabulary had started changing. All these new phrases that sounded like Dorothy talking through Sarah's mouth. Financial health, practical thinking, age-appropriate planning, household optimization. Who talks like that? About their own mother? The 4th week brought what Dorothy called a family financial meeting. She'd prepared a presentation. Actual printed charts showing household income versus expenses, with my contributions highlighted in red as areas of concern and her suggestions highlighted in green as optimization opportunities. Tommy sat through the whole thing, nodding, like Dorothy was explaining the theory of relativity instead of dissecting my grocery shopping habits. Sarah took notes, like she was attending a business seminar instead of participating in an intervention about her mother's spending habits. "Now, Susan," Dorothy said, pointing to a pie chart that somehow made my prescription medications look like a luxury expense, "I want you to understand that none of this is criticism. We're all just trying to work together to make sure this household runs as efficiently as possible." Efficiently. There was that word again. The good news is that most of these issues are easily correctable with some simple lifestyle adjustments. Sarah and Tommy are willing to take over some of the financial responsibilities that might be becoming burdensome for you. Burdensome, like paying for my own food and medication, was some kind of favor I was asking from the family instead of basic adult independence. What kind of responsibilities? Dorothy consulted her notes because, of course, she had notes. Well, for starters, combining some of the household accounts might create better oversight and reduce redundant fees. Instead of you maintaining separate utilities accounts, for instance, everything could go through one primary account holder. One primary account holder, Sarah. That way, Sarah can handle the details of payment scheduling and budgeting, and you wouldn't have to worry about keeping track of all those different due dates and amounts. Wouldn't have to worry. Like managing my own bills was a source of stress instead of a basic adult function I'd been performing competently for 4 decades. "I think I can handle paying my own electric bill, Dorothy." "Of course you can, dear. But why should you have 2? Sarah's already managing the household finances, and this would just streamline the process for everyone. Streamline, optimize, efficiency. Dorothy's language was slowly rewiring how my family talked about my place in our home. After the meeting, I found Sarah in Emma's room, reading bedtime stories with a voice that sounded tired and strained. Emma was curled up against her mother, but she kept glancing toward the door like she was waiting for someone else to join them. "Grandma always does the voices better," Emma said softly, and for a moment, Sarah's face cracked with something that looked like regret. "Grandma's busy with important adult things tonight, sweetheart." "Is Grandma in trouble?" "No, honey, Grandma's not in trouble. We're just trying to help her with some complicated grown-up stuff." Help her. Like I was a child who needed assistance instead of an adult who'd been managing complicated grown-up stuff since before Sarah was born. Later that night, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Sarah and Dorothy talking in those low, careful tones people use when they're discussing something they don't want overheard. I stood at the top of the stairs in my bathrobe, feeling ridiculous and guilty and desperate all at once. "I just think we need to be careful about how we approach this," Sarah was saying. "She's still my mother." "Of course she is, sweetheart. And that's exactly why this is so important. The longer we let these patterns continue, the more difficult it becomes for everyone." Patterns. Always patterns with Dorothy. It just feels like we're ganging up on her sometimes. "Sarah, honey, you can't think of it that way. You're protecting your family's financial security. You're protecting Emma's future. Your mother had her turn to be the decision maker, and she did a wonderful job raising you. But now it's your turn to be the adult in this situation. Your turn to be the adult, like I'd somehow reverted to childhood when I wasn't paying attention. She's going to be upset. She'll be upset initially, yes. Change is always difficult for people her age. But once she adjusts to having less financial responsibility, she'll probably find it quite liberating." Liberating. Dorothy had a gift for making every loss of autonomy sound like a gift. What if she refuses to consolidate the accounts? There was a pause, long enough that I found myself holding my breath. "Well," Dorothy said finally, "that's when we'll know for certain that her judgment about financial matters isn't what it used to be." No reasonable person would refuse help managing expenses that are clearly becoming overwhelming. No reasonable person. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Agree to give up your financial independence or prove that you're unreasonable. Prove that your judgment can't be trusted. Prove that the people who love you are right to be concerned about your decision-making capabilities. I went back to my room and wrote everything down in my journal, word for word as best I could remember. The charts, the suggestions, the conversation. I'd overheard all of it. Because I was beginning to understand that Dorothy wasn't just organizing our household or offering helpful suggestions. She was building a case, documenting my inadequacies, highlighting my limitations, creating a narrative where I was the problem that needed solving. And Sarah, my beautiful, trusting daughter, was helping her do it. The next morning, I woke up to find Dorothy in my garden, not admiring it, not helping with it, but evaluating it. She was walking between my flower beds with a notepad, making observations about maintenance requirements and seasonal expenses. "Good morning, Susan. I hope you don't mind. I was just assessing the outdoor spaces." Sarah mentioned that gardening has become quite time-consuming for you. Time-consuming. Like the hours I spent nurturing the roses and vegetables that fed our family were somehow wasted effort instead of one of the few remaining sources of joy and purpose in my increasingly constrained life. I enjoy gardening, Dorothy. It's not a chore for me. Oh, I'm sure you do, dear. But at our age, we have to start thinking practically about how we spend our energy. All this bending and lifting and weeding, it's quite strenuous. She gestured toward my tomato plants, heavy, with fruit that would soon be ready for harvest. Tomatoes that Emma loved to pick and eat straight from the vine. Tomatoes that saved us hundreds of dollars in grocery costs every summer. I was thinking that a nice low-maintenance landscape design might be more appropriate. Maybe some attractive ground cover, a few perennial shrubs that don't require much. Attention. Require much attention, like my garden was demanding something from me instead of giving back everything I put into it. That afternoon, Sarah approached me with another folder. More articles, more highlighted research, more of Dorothy's helpful findings. "Mom, Dorothy showed me some statistics about gardening injuries in seniors. Did you know that emergency room visits for gardening-related accidents increase by 40% after age 65? I've been gardening for 30 years without ending up in the emergency room, Sarah." But that's exactly Dorothy's point. The longer you've been doing something, the more likely you are to get overconfident and stop taking proper safety precautions. Overconfident. Another one of Dorothy's favorite concepts. I was overconfident about my finances, overconfident about my physical capabilities, overconfident about my ability to make decisions without guidance from people who supposedly knew better. What does Dorothy suggest? Sarah opened the folder to reveal landscape design printouts featuring yards full of rocks and mulch and plants that looked like they belonged in a desert rather than the lush garden I'd spent decades creating. She found some really beautiful, low-maintenance options that would give you all the visual appeal without the physical demands. Visual appeal. Like my garden was decorative rather than functional. Like it didn't feed us and calm my nerves and connect me to the changing seasons and the rhythm of growth and harvest that had anchored my life since I was Emma's age. But I was beginning to understand Dorothy's strategy now. It wasn't enough to take away my financial autonomy and my household authority. She needed to eliminate everything that gave me purpose, everything that proved I was still capable, still contributing, still valuable to this family I'd helped build. The garden had to go because it demonstrated that I could still create and nurture and provide, just like everything else that made me who I was. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning in October, 6 months after Dorothy had walked through our front door with her practiced smile and her hidden agenda. I was making Emma's lunch for school, something I'd been doing every day since she started kindergarten 2 years ago. peanut butter and jelly cut into triangles the way she liked, apple slices with a squeeze of lemon to keep them fresh, and a handwritten note tucked into the side pocket of her lunchbox. Little messages like, "Have a wonderful day, sweetheart," or, "Remember, Grandma loves you to the moon and back." Dorothy appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing my apron again, watching me work with that evaluating expression that had become as familiar as the sound of my own heartbeat. "Susan, dear, I've been meaning to talk to you about Emma's lunch routine." I kept my hands busy, spreading peanut butter with careful, even strokes, trying to keep my voice level. "What about it?" "Well, Sarah and I have been discussing Emma's nutritional needs, and we're concerned that some of these lunch choices might not be meeting current pediatric dietary guidelines." Current pediatric dietary guidelines. Of course, Dorothy had research about this too. "Emma loves these lunches. She's healthy, she's growing, and she eats everything I pack for her." "I'm sure she does, dear. Children will eat what they're given, especially if it's full of sugar and simple carbohydrates, but that doesn't mean it's what's best for their developing systems." She moved closer, and I could smell her perfume, something expensive and sharp that reminded me of the way hospital disinfectant tries to mask the smell of sickness. Sarah's purchased some wonderful organic meal components that would be much more appropriate for Emma's age group. Pre-packaged portions with proper nutritional labeling, balanced protein ratios, controlled sodium levels. Pre-packaged, instead of homemade. Instead of made with love by someone who knew exactly what Emma liked and what made her smile when she opened her lunchbox at school. "Dorothy, I've been making Emma's lunches since she started school. And you've done a lovely job, Susan. But Emma's getting older now, and her nutritional requirements are becoming more sophisticated. Sarah feels it would be better if lunch preparation was handled by someone with more current knowledge about child nutrition standards." Someone with more current knowledge. Not me, someone else. Someone younger, more informed, more capable of meeting a 7-year-old's sophisticated nutritional requirements. I finished cutting Emma's sandwich, my hands moving automatically while my mind tried to process what was happening. First my finances, then my garden, now my role in my granddaughter's daily routine. Everything that connected me to this family was being systematically transferred to other people who supposedly knew better. "Where is Sarah?" "She's upstairs getting ready for work." She asked me to handle this conversation because she knows how emotional you get about changes, and she didn't want Emma to overhear any unpleasantness. Emotional unpleasantness. Like my desire to continue caring for my granddaughter was some kind of character flaw that needed to be managed delicately. "I think I should talk to Sarah directly about this." Dorothy's expression shifted slightly, and for just a moment, I saw something underneath the practiced concern. Something cold and calculating that made my skin crawl. "Susan, I understand this is difficult. For you. Change is always hard, especially when we're not as young as we used to be. But continuing to resist every suggestion Sarah makes is only creating more stress for everyone. Every suggestion Sarah makes. Like these ideas were coming from my daughter instead of being planted in her head by a woman who'd been living in our house for 6 months. That's when Emma came bounding into the kitchen, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her hair still messy from sleep despite Sarah's attempts to smooth it down upstairs. "Morning, Grandma. Did you put a note in my lunch today?" I looked down at the lunchbox in my hands, at the small piece of paper I'd already tucked into the side pocket. This morning's message read, "You make every day brighter, my sweet girl." "Of course I did, sweetheart." "What does it say?" "Before." I could answer. Dorothy stepped forward and gently took the lunchbox from my hands. "Emma, honey, your mom wanted me to tell you that we're going to try some new lunch options starting today. Some very special, healthy meals that are perfect for growing girls." Emma's face fell. "But I like Grandma's lunches." I know you do, sweetheart. But sometimes we have to try new things that are better for us, even if we don't understand why, right away. I watched my granddaughter's confusion, saw her looking between Dorothy and me like she was trying to figure out why the adults in her life couldn't agree on something as simple as a peanut butter sandwich. Can Grandma still put notes in my new lunch? Dorothy's pause lasted just a fraction too long. We'll see, honey. The new lunch containers might not have space for extras like that. No space for extras. Like my love letters to my granddaughter were unnecessary clutter instead of the highlight of her school day. That evening, after Emma was in bed and Tommy was watching television in the living room, I finally confronted Sarah directly. I found her in her bedroom, folding laundry with mechanical precision, and I noticed that Dorothy's clothes were mixed in with the family wash like she'd always been part of our household routine. Sarah, we need to talk. She looked up with an expression I didn't recognize, guarded, defensive. Like I was a problem she was preparing to solve rather than her mother asking for a conversation. If this is about Emma's lunch, Mom, Dorothy already explained the situation to you. Dorothy explained Dorothy's opinion to me. I'd like to hear yours. Sarah set down the shirt she was folding and turned to face me fully. My opinion is that Dorothy has experience with child development and nutrition that might be helpful for our family. What kind of experience? She raised 3 children, Mom. She has a degree in early childhood education. She's worked with families before. Worked with families. That phrase sent a chill down my spine that I couldn't quite explain. Sarah, honey, I raised you. I've been helping with Emma since she was born. Don't you think I know what's good for my own granddaughter? Of course you do, Mom. But times change. Parenting recommendations change. What worked 25 years ago might not be the best approach now. Times change. Parenting recommendations change. More of Dorothy's language coming out of Sarah's mouth. Since when do you think I don't know how to take care of children? Sarah's face softened slightly, and for a moment, I saw my daughter instead of Dorothy's spokesperson. I don't think that, Mom. I just think that maybe it's time to let other people help with some of the responsibilities you've been carrying. I want to carry those responsibilities, Sarah. Taking care of Emma, contributing to this household, that's not a burden for me. That's what gives my life meaning. But that's exactly what Dorothy's worried about. What do you mean? Sarah sat down on the edge of her bed, and I could see her choosing her words carefully. She's concerned that you've become too dependent on feeling needed by our family, that maybe it's not healthy for you to base your entire sense of purpose on taking care of other people. Too dependent on feeling needed. Not healthy to base your sense of purpose on caring for family. I felt something crack inside my chest, like a piece of my heart was physically breaking away. Sarah, taking care of the people I love isn't a psychological problem. It's who I am. I know, Mom, and that's beautiful. But Dorothy thinks that at your age, you should be focusing more on taking care of yourself instead of always putting everyone else first. At your age. There it was again, the gentle reminder that I was too old to be useful, too old to be needed, too old to have a role in the family I'd helped build. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house around me, and I realized that those sounds had changed. The creaks and settlements that used to feel like a lullaby now felt like warnings. This house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place where I was being slowly, carefully erased. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Dorothy's previous son-in-law. Had taken me weeks to track down his number, but I'd finally found him through a mutual acquaintance at my book club. His name was Michael, and he'd been married to Dorothy's eldest daughter for 8 years before their divorce 3 years ago. Mrs. Patterson? His voice was cautious when I introduced myself. Is everything okay? I need to ask you about Dorothy, about your experience with her when she lived with your family. The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long, I thought he might have hung up. She's living with you now? For the past 6 months. She's supposed to be staying temporarily while her house is being repaired. But, Mrs. Patterson, there was no house repair. Dorothy lost her house in a foreclosure 8 months ago. She's been moving from family member to family member ever since. The words hit me like cold water. What? She lived with us for almost a year before the divorce. Started the same way, just temporary, just until she got back on her feet. But she had this way of... He paused, searching for words. She had this way of making you feel like you were the problem. Like every boundary you tried to set was unreasonable. Every concern you raised was selfish. My hands were shaking as I held the phone. What happened? She turned my wife against me, made her believe that I was trying to control her, that I didn't understand family loyalty, that a good husband would welcome his mother-in-law's guidance instead of resenting it. His voice was bitter with remembered pain. By the time Lisa finally saw what was happening, our marriage was destroyed. How did Lisa finally see it? Dorothy got careless. Lisa found text messages on Dorothy's phone, conversations with other people where she was bragging about teaching that boy some respect and making jokes about how easy it was to manipulate young couples who didn't understand proper family hierarchy. Proper family hierarchy. I thought about all those conversations I'd overheard, all those gentle corrections and helpful suggestions that had slowly stripped away my autonomy in my own home. Mrs. Patterson, you need to be very careful. Dorothy doesn't just visit families. She takes them over. And she's very, very good at making it look like she's doing you a favor. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the coffee mug Dorothy had moved from my favorite cabinet to a less convenient one because it optimized the workflow. Everything she'd done suddenly looked different through this new lens. Not helpful, not concerned, strategic. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went through Dorothy's belongings. I told myself I was looking for evidence of her housing situation, proof that she'd been lying about the temporary nature of her stay. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Hidden in a folder inside her largest suitcase were copies of our bank statements going back months. Not just mine, Sarah's and Tommy's too. There were notes in Dorothy's handwriting, calculations, about our household income and expenses, and what looked like a timeline of financial decisions she'd influenced or planned to influence. But it was the notebook that made me understand the full scope of what had been happening to my family. Pages. And pages of observations about our daily routines, our relationships, our individual weaknesses and fears. Notes about Sarah's insecurity about her parenting skills, Tommy's desire to please authority figures, Emma's attachment to routine, and pages about me, my resistance to change, my emotional dependency on family roles, my age-related decline in decision-making capacity. She'd been studying us, all of us, like we were a problem she was systematically solving. The final page was the most chilling. It was a timeline stretching out over the next year, with goals for each month. S to take over household finances completely. S to assume primary childcare decisions. Susan to accept assisted living consultation. S to agree to power of attorney transfer. Power of attorney. Dorothy wasn't just planning to take over our house. She was planning to take over my legal autonomy. I was photographing pages with my phone when I heard the front door open. Sarah's voice calling out that she was home early from work. Dorothy's response from somewhere upstairs. I quickly put everything back exactly as I'd found it and went to the kitchen, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Mom? Sarah appeared in the doorway, and I could see immediately that something was different about her expression. Harder, more resolved. We need to talk." Dorothy appeared behind her, and I knew without being told that this was it. The moment Dorothy had been building toward for 6 months. "Sit down, Mom." I remained standing. "What's this about?" Sarah glanced at Dorothy, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Dorothy and I have been talking about the living situation, and we think it's time to make some changes." Changes. That word had lost all meaning except as a euphemism for loss. "What kind of changes?" "We think it would be better for everyone if you found your own place, somewhere smaller, more manageable for someone your age." Dorothy found some wonderful senior living options that might be perfect for you. Senior living options. Dorothy had found them. Of course she had. The room started to spin slightly, and I gripped the back of a kitchen chair to steady myself. "You want me to move? Out of my own home?" "It's not your home, Mom." Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "It's our home. The house is in my name. The mortgage is my responsibility, and Dorothy's helped me realize that maintaining separate households within the same space isn't sustainable anymore." Not my home. After 11 years of contributing to expenses, after helping with the down payment, after pouring my love and energy into every room, it wasn't my home. "Sarah, please, let's talk about this privately." "We are talking privately, Mom. Dorothy's family now. She's living here permanently, and we need to make arrangements that work for everyone." Living here permanently. There it was. The truth Dorothy had been, hiding behind temporary house repairs and helpful visits. Where am I supposed to go? Dorothy stepped forward with a folder full of brochures. Senior communities with names like Golden Years Manor and Sunset Gardens, places designed to warehouse elderly people who'd become inconvenient to their families. These are all lovely facilities, Susan. Some of them even have gardening programs, so you could continue your hobby in a more structured environment. Structured. Environment. Hobby. Like everything I'd built and nurtured and loved was just a pastime that could be replicated in some institutional setting. I need time to think about this. Of course you do, dear. That's why we're giving you 2 weeks' notice instead of asking you to leave immediately. 2 weeks' notice. Like I was an employee being fired instead of a mother being expelled by her own daughter. That night, I called Michael again. "She's kicking you out?" His voice was angry on my behalf, which was more support than I'd gotten from my own family in months. "They want me in senior housing within 2 weeks. Mrs. Patterson, listen to me very carefully. Don't go quietly. Document everything. Get copies of any financial records that show your contributions to that household. And whatever you do, don't let her isolate you from other people who care about you." I think it's too late for that. It's not too late, but you have to fight back. Dorothy counts on people being too polite, too shocked, too ashamed to expose what she's doing. After I hung up, I sat down with my journal and wrote everything down. The conversation with Sarah, Dorothy's timeline, the financial documents, Michael's warnings, all of it. Because I was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about me losing my home. This was about Dorothy successfully destroying another family. And if I didn't find a way to stop her, Sarah and Tommy and Emma would be her next victims after I was safely tucked away in a senior living facility where my warnings couldn't reach them. The next morning, I did something that scared me more than anything else in this whole nightmare. I called Emma's school and asked to speak with her teacher. "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Susan Patterson, Emma's grandmother. I need to ask you about some changes you might have noticed in Emma's behavior recently." "Oh, Mrs. Patterson, I'm so glad you called. I've been meaning to reach out to Emma's parents, but I wanted to be careful about overstepping boundaries." My heart sank. "What's happening?" "Emma's been asking about you a lot. She wants to know why you don't make her lunches anymore, why you don't pick her up from school sometimes like you used to. And yesterday, she told me that her grandmother might be moving far away, and she seemed very upset about it. What exactly did she say? She said that the new grandmother doesn't like the old grandmother, and that sometimes she hears grown-ups arguing about whether grandmothers are supposed to live with families or live by themselves. The new grandmother. Emma was 7 years old, and she understood what the adults in her life were apparently too blind to see. Mrs. Rodriguez, I need you to know that I'm not moving by choice. I'm being forced out of my family's home. There was a pause. Mrs. Patterson, is everything okay? Is there anything I should be watching for with Emma? And that's when I realized that Dorothy's destruction wasn't just about me. It was about Emma, too. About a little girl who was losing her grandmother and didn't understand why, who was learning that family loyalty was conditional, that love could be withdrawn without explanation. Don't know yet, I told Mrs. Rodriguez. But if Emma seems upset or confused about family things, please call me directly. I might not be living with them much longer, but I'm still her grandmother. That afternoon, while Dorothy was out running errands and Sarah was at work, I made the most important phone call of my life. I called our next-door neighbor, Helen Morrison, who'd lived beside us for 15 years and had watched this family grow and change and love each other through all the normal struggles of life. Helen, I need a favor. Can you come over tonight around 7? I need someone to witness a conversation I'm going to have with my daughter. Because I was done being erased, done being dismissed, done letting Dorothy rewrite my family's story while I disappeared quietly into the background. It was time to fight back.